It's the morning after Election Day, and marijuana remains illegal in Ohio, despite the spending of a lot of money to convince voters to legalize it. But the battle for marijuana is in rounds, and yesterday was round one. We can expect to see many more. That's the topic for today's opinion show. We get together with members of the editorial board of cleveland.com and the Plain Dealer to talk about issues of the day. I'm here today with Elizabeth Sullivan, the opinion director at cleveland.com, along with editorial writers Pete Krause, Ted Dian, and Sharon Broussard. Let's start with how big of a blowout this was. Of all the polls that were out there predicting it to be close, we got to give a tip of the hat to the University of Akron, which was the one poll that asked the question the right way and got the response that this would be the blowout it was. It was almost 2-to-1, 60 to 40, I guess is what it ended up.
But, you know, the other way of looking at it is, if this had been a straight measure without the monopoly, you know, component to legalize marijuana, the polls showed that it would have been very close. Yeah. And I think that that has to frame kind of how Ohio thinks about this going forward, that there are huge numbers of people here who do feel, at least about medical marijuana, that it should be available. And I think that this is something that the legislature has to take note of and act on, as you know, a number of people have stated recently.
Yeah, I'm sure that Houston was, you know, clapping himself on the back yesterday, because I received the big pamphlet. I think it was the League of Women Voters, and it had the wording of every constitutional amendment. And the word that jumped out at me was monopoly. And I thought to myself, if I had not gone to school since high school, but I vaguely remember something about railroads and steel companies, I'd say, monopolies, that's a bad thing. I don't know what the hell it is, but it's bad. And I think that's definitely what killed it.
Well,
so.
It wasn't the League of Women Voters pamphlet. It was,
where was
the
it?
ballot language itself. When you looked at the ballot, practically the first word on issue 3 was to create a monopoly.
Yeah, but I got the pamphlet before the ballot.
I think there is legitimate questions about whether legalization of marijuana should occur.
Before we get to that, let's wrap up the part she just said. The wording was there. It did hit you in the face when you looked at it. But there's also there was a lot of discussion about that. That seemed to be a big hitch for people. But it does raise, the way it was blown out by that huge percentage, it does raise the question that Pete just raised, is Ohio really actually leaning against it? Are the pollsters wrong? Because this was a big defeat. They spent, you know, tens of millions to get their message across. It was a very effective campaign, and it was completely rejected.
Well, I think the impressive thing about this was that people were paying attention, because the people I know and people I've seen on Facebook and the debates I saw were largely a lot of people who really think that it ought to be legalized, but not under this. And I think people really, the newspapers and the opinion, you know, the opinion show and lots of people who oppose this got the message out that even if you're for legalization of marijuana, this is a bad way to do it, and there'll be another day.
Well, and issue 2, look at issue 2, which is the
prohibits monopolies.
Prohibits monopolies. That last I saw went passed like 52-48.
It was closer.
So you would have thought that if the monopoly issue was the overriding issue, that would have won by a much wider margin, but it didn't.
But let me, you know, Pete, you've been a vocal, very vocal about the idea that the editorial board did not come out in favor or against the actual legalization of marijuana. All of our discussion had been about this format, and you've been advocating that at some point people in Ohio need to make a decision about the legalization. That's very likely to be on the ballot again next year. The Democrats want it on the ballot to get at the vote for the presidential election.
I'm not sure it is going to be on the ballot next year. Now, it will be on the ballot in a lot of other states. I understand there's like 5 or 6 different states that are going to have.
The proponents announced last night they're planning to have.
Well, that's what they're always going to say, that right after the fact.
They've already circulated petitions. There are issues out there already.
Well, this group did not comport itself particularly well. I mean, they spent $25 million on a pretty shameful campaign. I'm not sure who would want to jump in bed with them again next year, but maybe it will happen. I mean, legalization of marijuana, it should not be taken to a referendum. It should be decided, I think, by the legislatures, because that's where I think you would have the purest debate. Now, if it was a strictly legalization issue and went to referendum, you know, perhaps, but as long as you have any kind of moneyed interest behind it, that's going to skew the way it's presented. But the thing is, the
legislature has refused to deal with it. So you have this big
as they have in 40 other states or 45 other states.
It legal. And so what is the best way to forestall another cynical
ballot
issue?
But who really wants it legal? I mean, people who want to smoke pot get their pot pretty easily these days. The issue, I think, the critical issue about legalization comes down to the medical marijuana side and the decriminalization side, the unfair sentencings that occur. And I think those are legitimate concerns. Decriminalization of marijuana, or sentencing reform, potential medical marijuana uses, although that I still really think that needs to be looked at, and that probably the answer there could be federal rather than state.
And that's where I think the legislature can play a role. Even if they're not inclined to pass a medical marijuana bill, by having hearings, they could actually bring out something that a well-funded, one-sided campaign about a ballot issue can't bring out, and that is a lot of the the mixed results and uncertainty about all aspects of medical marijuana that we carried an op-ed from a local doctor that highlighted all of those unknowns.
But when you say medical marijuana, you make it sound like it's something where you get a prescription like you would get for some kind of other drug, and it's nothing like that. You get a card that says you can go buy as much weed as you want. There is no prescription, and in every state where they've done it, it's become a de facto legalization.
Yeah, we don't want that, do we?
If we're going to talk about using it for medicinal purposes, that's really the job of the federal government and the FDA.
Yeah.
Well,
right.
I think that my personal view is that marijuana legalization should happen at the federal level because, it creates this uncomfortable kind of dance when states have legalized marijuana and the federal government still has criminalized.
You got to throw your joint out at the border.
It's a large reason why there is inadequate research.
So you just said you think the federal government should legalize marijuana.
I actually do.
I'm sure you agree with that.
How I feel about legalization in general.
I think it'd be a terrible thing to put the imprimatur of legalization and social acceptance on a drug that scrambles your brain. And people will say, well, alcohol is legal, and that leads to a lot of problems too. And yeah, so let's, since we have one bad thing, let's use that to argue for putting another bad thing with, with impaired drivers on the road, more than there are today. And
alcohol is a bad thing, so you don't drink it?
Well, I'm talking about the results on the road and the health issues that happen. But the problem is, I think the challenge is going to be for the people in the next, when this comes up again, for the people who oppose legalization, is to draw a line between medical marijuana and recreational. And there are ways, you don't have to, the way I understand it, you don't have to get high in order to get the benefits of marijuana on a variety of illnesses.
It depends. So, again, the research shows that you can take all of the THC factor out and have other benefits, but that there's
not in every case.
But not in every case, that because you,
well,
again,
the
research
that's according to Cheech and
Chong.
Chong.
The problem is in these
Snoop Dogg.
Right, go ahead.
In these states where it's legal, it really makes professional liars out of doctors and physicians, because they write. There's from what I understand, it's very easy to get a prescription for medical marijuana when everybody knows, you the doctor and everybody else knows that the only reason you want that is so you can buy dope legally.
And it's not a prescription.
Yeah, it's just a card. That's how they do it in California.
When we were migrating our iPhones recently, I was reminded, I took pictures when I was in California of the guy on the corner, dressed as weed. With the sign, $25 medical marijuana card. That's all it costs.
One point, what keeps a 15-year-old kid from drinking alcohol? Besides, he's not supposed to. It tastes terrible, okay? Marijuana can be packaged into, to a 15-year-old kid it does. Your first beer, you're going to tell me you liked your first beer? Or but anyway,
a lot of people don't.
But marijuana can be packaged in a way where it's candy. And a kid could eat, and I don't want to sound like, the reefer madness guy, but they could swallow 8, 10 pieces of candy, and if it's got some highly powerful THC in it or whatever, I mean,
Right, an
that's
emergency room
dangerous.
visits in Colorado for kids who
Yeah,
ingest
and that's got to be taken
even though
seriously.
You do
Yeah.
sound like the Reefer Madness guy. Sharon, we're cutting you out of the conversation.
Oh, I'm totally with Betsy in terms of the legislature being involved. And that's only because I would like to hear more of the pros and cons. Right now, I'm leaning against very strongly for the reasons that Pete has talked about and also Ted here. But, you know, and I also wonder, is there enough information out there for like for certainty? Because there's been so little research, at least done here in this country, which is what we might take more seriously than maybe in European studies. So it's a quandary.
Well, what we know is for the next year, the air stays clear, but it is almost a certainty that the legislature, the voters will be dealing with
I think
this
there'll be
again.
plenty of pot smoking in Ohio regardless.
Yeah, currently going on right now. Yeah.
We've appreciated all of the opinions you shared with us this past year on what you think on this, and we'd be interested in hearing your thoughts after the election. Please leave your thoughts in the comments where you found this show. See you next time.